the stories of people leaving are just horrendous. We interviewed one young man today who woke up in his apartment smelling smoke, and his apartment was on fire. And so he doused himself with water. I think you call them flip flops. We call them rubber slippers. When he was running out of his apartment, his rubber slippers were melting on the road. He had second-degree burns. Jumped into the ocean, got rescued, and gotta love people in Hawaii. He checked himself out of the hospital the next day. He had second-degree burns pretty much all over his torso and head. And he said, no, save the bed for somebody who's more seriously injured.
26 people have died as wildfires blaze across the Hawaiian island of Maui, causing widespread damage. Thousands of people have been evacuated into makeshift shelters, and earlier this evening, the US President Joe Biden declared it a major disaster. This lady spoke to a local reporter.
This is everything I own now. My little baby bird passed away in the fire. My friends passed away in the fire. My house passed away in the fire. So lots of devastation, but also, look at this beautiful community around us here. All of these caring people, people like you helping us. So thank you. I didn't get any warning, and that's one of the things I think is really upsetting about this situation is I never received any evacuation notice, but my apartment burned down to the ground and people around me were dying. And so we just made the call ourselves. We looked outside and we saw the flames a half block away and we ran.
Some of the eyewitness accounts are utterly catastrophic and difficult to discuss. Things like seeing, I'm sorry to give you what are extremely graphic details, bodies floating in the water, people jumping over the seawall with minutes to spare to escape their homes, and then waiting in some cases for hours in the water to be rescued. Let's find out more about what's going on now. Joining me from Honolulu, the state capital, is Dan Nakaso, writer for Honolulu Star Advisor. Dan, thank you very much for your time. Can you give us any idea of what the last 24 hours have been like?
Chaotic, simply put. Yesterday morning started with initial report that 6 people had died. By the end of the night, it was 36. The fires were still out of control. The scenario that created the fires on Maui and also on the Big Island have lessened, and which is giving some hope that firefighters will be able to get upper hand on them today. But we've got power out in Lahaina and around the area. There was no cell phone service because the fiber optics were destroyed. No landlines, no internet, of course. Officials are communicating by radio. At the same time, these fires are still burning, and there's massive search and rescue operations going on to try to find possibly more victims. The Navy and the Coast Guard are patrolling the waters looking for more people who jumped in. But the stories of people leaving are just horrendous. We interviewed one young man today who woke up in his apartment smelling smoke, and his apartment was on fire. And so he doused himself with water. I think you call them flip flops. We call them rubber slippers. When he was running out of his apartment, his rubber slippers were melting on the road. He had second-degree burns. Jumped into the ocean, got rescued, and gotta love people in Hawaii. He checked himself out of the hospital the next day. He had second-degree burns pretty much all over his torso and head. And he said, no, save the bed for somebody who's more seriously injured. He checked himself into an emergency shelter. We talked to a family that were driving frantically to get out of Lahaina, and all the roads were blocked. And they circled the neighborhood 5 times, and the mom was praying to God to get them way out. And they went down a road, and it just happened to be their way out. The woman that you interviewed was right. It all happened last minute. And Maui has wildfires fairly frequently, but this one was at a whole different level. Because usually they're contained to fallow sugarland. But this one jumped to buildings and houses, and then it's a whole different ballgame when that starts happening. People are still stuck in airports. This morning, once you start changing the flight schedule across the Hawaiian Islands, it throws up everything. Mm-hmm. So people slept overnight, and the shelters are full on Maui. Tourists are trying to get to Oahu. It's going to take weeks, maybe months, before we assess the total scope. And of course, the main priority, trying to come to the aid of people who are injured.
Yeah.
but still very much in flux.
People have said it was apocalyptic. That's kind of the only way they could describe it. And the stories you're talking about there just paint that picture so painfully. You've now got a situation where hundreds, thousands of people don't have anywhere to stay. What provision is there for them currently?
Well, so they made arrangements to fly both residents and tourists from Maui to the island of Oahu, Honolulu, and they're keeping them at the Hawaii Convention Center as an emergency shelter. If there are vacancies and they're trying to find vacancies, they can check into a hotel room, but all their arrangements are on Maui. And so, some foreign visitors have their passports still in their hotel rooms. There's no power. So the hotels don't have power. The shelters don't have power. It's very much up in the air, and flights are getting canceled, and just a lot of unknown right now.
We heard from the lady who we just heard a very brief clip of. She was saying we just weren't prepared for this outbreak of fire. What I'm led to believe is there was what you call a red flag warning in place for fire, but that didn't give an idea of the gravitas or the scale of what was to come. Is that because people actually didn't know what was coming?
Well, there are a variety of factors. There's drought on Maui. There's a lot of dried out vegetation. There was low humidity, which is unusual in Hawaii. And the big factor seems to be the remnants of Hurricane Dora passed the Big Island, but it was still kicking up 80-mile-an-hour winds. And that seems to have been the trigger of this whole thing. So, all these fires broke out simultaneously. So there was suspicion that somebody was doing something, some human was doing something bad. What they believe happened. So 30 power poles went down, 29 in the Lahaina area. That may have been the literal spark that set off this tinderbox. And because it's Lahaina and it's close to, it's in neighborhoods and business district, that's why it happened so fast. And because of the high winds, they weren't able to fly in helicopters to do water drops the first night. So it just kept growing and growing and growing. They don't even know how big it is now, but they do know that at least 271 structures were damaged. I think that's a low number, given the photos we've taken and seen. But yeah, so much of the media characterizes Lahaina as a Maui's tourist area, which it is, but it's also very rich in cultural and Native Hawaiian history. And so it's a point of pride for local residents. It was the original seat of power for the Hawaiian kingdom before Western contact. King Kamehameha still has what they call it, a brick wall in Lahaina. And of course, later on, it became a port for whaling ships. So other than just Mai Tais and good food, it goes back hundreds of years as a cultural icon of that area. And a very small community, barely over 13,000 people. They're going to be out of work. Businesses are closing. They may have lost their homes. And these are people that just barely came back from COVID. And the neighbor islands continue to struggle economically. And this is going to be a real hit.
Yeah,
we're gonna lose a lot of people.
Biden said, "Look, this is a major disaster. I'm going to unblock some federal aid to help." Small comfort?
No. So one of the things Hawaii does best is comes together, because we are one of the remote populated places on the planet. But the feds always help. People chip in, and in less than 12 hours. $1 million was raised for relief, among many other charitable efforts. There's, as we speak right now, outside the state capitol, the senators who represent Maui have organized donations. Hawaii, just under 50% of residents live paycheck to paycheck, and they're one disaster away from financial ruin. But people in Hawaii always give. They understand it could be me. They understand everybody's struggling. And it's really heartening to see. And right out of the gate with this one, this one group raised $1 million. And does it make up for a loss of a loved one? Of course not. But, we got people that fled their homes with the clothes on their back. And now they got to get to get through the next week. And it's going to be a big hit for that area and for the state, because businesses are interconnected here, and if a restaurant goes down, and the employees get laid off, that affects their supplier and
Of
their
course,
supplier.
yeah. Dan, thank you so much for talking to us in what is an absolutely incredible time for you and your paper for finding some time to speak to us. Really appreciate
You're welcome.
it.
You're welcome.
Dan
We want to spread the
Nakaso.
word.
Yeah, of course. And it is, heartbreaking story. Dan, I really appreciate it. Writer for the Honolulu Star Advertiser.